The first thing Caleb Mercer heard that morning was a grown man screaming across the marina like somebody had just lit his boat on fire. Hey, hey, don't you put that bucket in my water. Folks turned so fast you would have thought somebody fired a gun. Caleb had only been at Blackwater Cove Marina maybe 20 minutes, just helping his nephew set up folding chairs for the town's little Memorial Day kids ceremony. Nothing fancy, just lemonade, paper flags, and one of those old church ladies insisting everybody sign a giant card for veterans. Quiet little Lake Town stuff. But then this whole thing unfolded right there under that brutal Carolina sun, and I swear to God, nobody who saw it ever looked at that marina the same way again. The man holding the bucket was an older black gentleman, maybe late 50s, lean build, denim work jacket faded almost gray, silver in his beard, calm eyes, the kind of eyes that looked like they'd already seen every ugly thing the world could throw at a man and just got tired of reacting to it. His name was Isaiah Coleman, though most folks around the lake just knew him as that quiet veteran down by Pier 7. The guy yelling at him was Randall Bishop, and if you've ever lived in a small southern lake town, you know the type immediately. Loud truck, louder opinions, flag tank tops stretched over a beer gut, always talking about real Americans like he personally printed the Constitution in his garage. Randall had money too, inherited from his daddy's construction business, which somehow made him think he owned every inch of shoreline his eyes could see. He came storming down the dock, pointing like Isaiah had committed some federal crime. I said, "Get that damn bucket out of the lake." Isaiah barely even looked up. "Just grabbing a gallon for the ceremony, sir." Real polite. Too polite, honestly. But Randall wasn't interested in listening. You people always got some excuse. The whole dock went quiet after that one. Even the gulls sounded uncomfortable. Caleb remembers this teenage kid behind him whispering, "Oh man," under his breath because everybody knew right then this wasn't about water anymore. Isaiah stayed calm though. That's what made it uncomfortable. Most people would have snapped back, maybe cussed him out, maybe shoved him in the lake. Isaiah just stood there holding that metal bucket while Randall kept climbing higher and higher into his own rage. "This marina used to mean something," Randall barked. "Now anybody thinks they can walk in here and do whatever the hell they want." Isaiah finally looked up and said, real soft, "I've lived on this lake 32 years. And Randall laughed. Actually laughed. "No, you squat on it. Big difference. There's something ugly about a man when he realizes people are watching him, and instead of calming down, he performs harder. That's what Randall did. He wanted an audience. Wanted people nodding along. Problem was, nobody was nodding. They were just staring. See, Randall had been spiraling for months already. Ever since county records leaked that several parcels around Blackwater Cove had quietly changed ownership through some private trust nobody could identify. Randall had spent years trying to buy up the whole shoreline because he dreamed of turning the lake into some luxury gated resort, boat club memberships, private docks, rich retirees from Charlotte sipping cocktails where local kids used to fish. But every deal somehow kept falling apart. Somebody always outbid him at the last second. Somebody invisible. And that mystery had been eating him alive. Caleb didn't know all that at the time, though. Most people didn't. All they saw was a loud racist losing his mind over a bucket of lake water. Then Miss Darlene stepped out of the bait shop. Now if you lived around Blackwater Cove, you knew Miss Darlene. Tiny woman, cigarette voice, probably 70 years old, knew every secret in 3 counties. She took one look at Isaiah, and her whole face changed color. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Randall turned toward her, still puffed up like a rooster. "You know this guy?" She looked at Randall like he'd just kicked a church window in. "Boy, you better stop talking." And that right there should have been enough warning for any smart man alive. But Randall wasn't smart once pride got involved. Why? He owned the lake or something. The crazy part is, Isaiah almost smiled when he heard that. Not smug, not angry, just tired. Like life had finally brought him to a moment he knew was coming eventually. He bent down again toward the water, slow and careful, dipping the bucket into the lake while sunlight bounced across the ripples. Randall stepped forward so fast the dock shook beneath him. Then he kicked the bucket clean out of Isaiah's hand. Water exploded across the boards. One woman gasped so loud people turned around thinking she'd fallen in. The metal bucket rolled in circles, making that hollow clang 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 sound that somehow echoed through the entire marina. And for the first time, Isaiah looked hurt. Not furious. Hurt. Like something sacred had just been stepped on. He stared down at the spilled water for a long second before quietly saying, "That water was for my brother." Randall crossed his arms. "Then your brother can get his own damn lake." And buddy, the second those words left his mouth, the entire atmosphere changed. Miss Darlene covered her face. Caleb said later it felt like standing outside right before a tornado touches down, when the air gets heavy and every instinct in your body tells you something bad is about to happen. Isaiah straightened slowly, shoulders stiff, eyes distant now, almost somewhere else entirely. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out 2 old military dog tags hanging from a worn chain smooth from decades against skin. A younger guy near the dock whispered, "No way," because suddenly people were noticing things they somehow missed before. The trident pin on Isaiah's cap, the posture, the scars along his hands, and mounted on the weathered post behind him, half hidden beneath years of faded varnish and fishing advertisements, sat a bronze plaque hardly anybody ever bothered reading. Isaiah glanced at it once before looking back at Randall. "My brother died in Kandahar," he said quietly. "And every Memorial Day, I bring water from this lake to the children's lantern ceremony because this was his favorite place on earth." Nobody moved. Nobody even coughed. Randall's face lost a little color, but he still refused to back down. You could see the war happening inside him. That desperate, prideful panic where a man realizes he may have picked the wrong target, but he's too deep into the performance to stop now. "That still don't make this your property," Randall muttered. Isaiah looked at him for a long second, then finally turned his eyes toward the bronze plaque behind him. And that's when Caleb saw Randall read it for the first time. Founder, Commander Isaiah Coleman. Blackwater Veterans Memorial Preserve. Dedicated to the fallen sons of Carter County. Randall blinked twice like his brain physically rejected the words. Then Isaiah said the sentence nobody there would ever forget. "Actually," he said softly, "I bought this lake 15 years ago." And right then, a black SUV rolled onto the gravel road above the marina. Caleb could feel the temperature drop, even though the sun was still beating down on the dock. Everybody froze, and not in a staged way, but that kind of silence where even the wind holds its breath. Randall Bishop's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His chest was rising and falling fast, trying to catch some prideful comeback, but the words weren't coming. You could see the panic blooming behind his red face. All the years of thinking he ran this town, all the real American speeches, all the threats to anyone who didn't look like him, none of it mattered anymore. And Isaiah? He just stood there, bucket in hand, calm, steady, letting that moment stretch out, letting the water reflect the sun like some sacred mirror. Caleb swears he could almost hear Isaiah's thoughts, the quiet inventory of a life spent defending others, a life spent watching men like Randall make fools of themselves while thinking they were kings. Randall tried again, muttering something about authority, about rights, about lakes being for people who earned them. But now the dock crowd wasn't on his side. They were looking at Isaiah with that mix of awe and shame you see only when the truth hits hard. When someone quietly carries a weight you can't even imagine and then shows up in your face without the drama, without the fanfare. One older guy from the gift shop muttered, barely above a whisper, "He's a Medal of Honor recipient." And Caleb remembered thinking, of course he is, of course that makes sense, because the quiet ones always are. But Randall still wouldn't give in. He crossed his arms and squared up. The kind of energy you get when a man realizes he's about to be humiliated but refuses to step down because he's too proud to admit he's wrong. Isaiah, without a word, reached into his jacket again. This time it was slower, deliberate, showing the trident pin and 2 dog tags polished smooth from decades of wear, little badges of service, little symbols that carried more weight than all the yelling in the world. Caleb could see some of the younger kids in the crowd shift uncomfortably, like they were suddenly seeing history walk right in front of them. And then Isaiah did something most people wouldn't expect. He bent down and filled a second bucket from the lake, deliberately, quietly, as if he was reclaiming a little piece of peace the world had tried to stomp out. Randall tried to kick it again, but Miss Darlene was right there this time, hand on his chest, shaking her head, whispering, "Stop, boy, stop." But Randall was too far gone. He was pacing now, trying to convince the world that he was still in charge, still the alpha, still the guy with rights over a lake that didn't belong to him. Caleb thought about what might have happened if Isaiah had lost his patience right then. He could have thrown him in the water, shouted back, yelled something no one would forget. But Isaiah didn't. He just set the bucket down again, looked Randall dead in the eye, and said, softly, "This water is for my brother's ceremony. He didn't come home from Kandahar, and I bought this lake so men like him could rest here." It was calm, it was quiet, it was final. And then Caleb noticed movement up at the gravel road. A black SUV creeping down the slope. The crowd instinctively parted. Out stepped a woman in a sharp federal uniform carrying a folder with VA board markings stamped in bold red. Urgent review. She looked at Isaiah, almost nervously, as if the calm aura surrounding him demanded respect, demanded acknowledgement. "Sir," she said, handing him the folder, "you requested notification when the revelation file was ready." Caleb watched Isaiah take it slowly, thumb brushing the edge of the folder, eyes still fixed on Randall like the world was still holding its breath. Randall, meanwhile, had finally gotten his voice back, croaking something about how paperwork doesn't change a man's authority. But the irony was thick enough to taste. Isaiah, still calm, still deliberate, finally opened the folder. Caleb swears the whole dock leaned forward at the same time, like some invisible force was drawing everyone closer. Inside the folder were documents, photographs, and personal accounts. Things that would make anyone rethink what they thought they knew about service, about courage, about sacrifice. And Caleb realized the real conflict wasn't Randall versus Isaiah anymore. It was the world versus the truth, the arrogance of people blinded by privilege against the quiet authority of someone who had lived a life most could barely imagine. Randall's jaw twitched as he tried to process it all. Every threat he had ever shouted, every insult he had ever thrown. Meaningless. The dock was silent except for the faint rustle of papers and the gentle lap of water against the boards. Then Isaiah did something subtle but powerful. He looked at Randall again, just long enough to make him understand there would be no mercy, no forgiveness, only the truth. And then, like a whisper carried across the lake, he said, "Now tell me again whose country this is." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. The power was in the calm delivery, in the authority of a man who had earned the right to own more than land, to own the moral high ground, to be untouchable in his dignity. Caleb saw the color drain from Randall's face, watched his bravado crumple like a cheap tarp in a storm. He looked down at the dock, at the spilled water, at the bucket, at the plaque, at the dog tags, and for the first time, realized he wasn't in charge of anything but his own ignorance. Meanwhile, the federal woman gave Isaiah a nod, professional, respectful, urgent, and Caleb could tell the rest of the story was about to unfold far beyond anything Randall had prepared for. He didn't understand it yet. None of them did. But Caleb felt the tension coil like a spring ready to snap, felt the anticipation that the next moments would change not just Randall, not just the marina, but the way the town thought about who really belonged here. And somewhere deep in his chest, Caleb knew he would never forget this day. The day a bucket of water, a plaque, and a calm veteran had shattered the arrogance of a man who thought he owned a lake because he could yell the loudest. The dock stayed quiet, the kind of silence where even the gulls seemed to be holding their breath. Caleb could see Randall Bishop's chest heaving, every nerve in his body screaming, trying to reclaim some fragment of authority he'd lost the second Isaiah Coleman opened that folder. And Isaiah, he didn't rush, didn't glare, didn't even raise his voice. He just set the second bucket of water carefully down, almost ceremonially, and took a step back. The sunlight caught the trident pin on his cap, the dog tags around his neck, the plaque behind him. Everything aligned like a portrait of a life lived in honor, sacrifice, and quiet resilience. Then Isaiah said it again, just soft enough for Randall to hear, but loud enough that every bystander caught it too. "This water, it's for my brother. He didn't come home, and every Memorial Day, I bring it here so the kids remember him, so men like him can rest in peace. I didn't fight for anyone to own a lake. I fought so we'd all have a chance to stand tall, together." Caleb could feel Randall's knees weaken, the bluster draining out of him as if the words themselves were pulling it away. Randall opened his mouth, then shut it again. The bucket that had been kicked earlier sat there, half full, water sloshing quietly, reflecting the gold and green of the lake. Isaiah reached down and picked it up again, steady hands, and without a word, handed it to one of the kids helping set up the ceremony. "Go on. Take it to the lanterns, he said, nodding. And just like that, the tension shifted. People leaned forward, exhaling collectively, realizing the man they'd thought of as quiet, ordinary, was the one who carried the real weight of history. Caleb noticed some of the older veterans in the crowd had tears they were trying not to show, veterans who remembered similar faces, similar arrogance, and yet so few moments of justice like this. Randall finally looked away, face pale, eyes avoiding the plaque, avoiding the dog tags, avoiding the truth. The federal woman stepped closer, handing Isaiah a small note from the folder. "Sir, you're going to need to sit for this one," she said gently. Caleb had the sense it was a notification about benefits, recognition, perhaps even secrets Isaiah hadn't revealed yet, things only the government knew. Isaiah nodded, thumb brushing the corner of the envelope, eyes still on Randall for the briefest second, a glance that spoke more than words ever could. "Sometimes," he said softly, almost to himself, "you have to show people who you really are before they understand." Then he turned, walking slowly toward the edge of the dock, bucket in hand, letting the water spill back into the lake a few drops at a time, the sunlight glinting off each droplet like little memories falling home. Caleb could feel the crowd release the tension as one, a wave washing over them that left some quiet awe and some shame. Randall Bishop didn't know what to do. He didn't argue, didn't threaten, didn't even move. He just stood there, like the world had tilted, and for once, he realized he was a visitor in a story that wasn't his to command. Caleb watched Isaiah pause, look down at the plaque once more, then back toward the forest lining the lake. "Part of owning this lake," he muttered, "is letting it remind you why some things are bigger than money, bigger than pride, bigger than fear." Then he handed the folder back to the federal woman and gave a small nod. Caleb caught her eyes, wide, professional, urgent, and the unspoken message hung in the air. The story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Randall finally walked off the dock, shoulders slumped, pride shattered, and Caleb thought about how long it would take him to recover, if ever. The kids carried on with the ceremony anyway, lanterns flickering like little beacons of memory and hope, and Isaiah stayed on the dock for a moment longer, letting the water lap against the posts, letting the sun warm his face. And Caleb knew this was one of those days you carry with you. One of those moments where life sneaks up and rearranges what you thought you knew about respect, about courage, about who really owns the moral high ground. The black SUV waited at the edge of the gravel road, engine quiet, like a silent witness. Caleb saw the federal woman hand Isaiah another envelope from the folder, something marked urgent, something that promised the next chapter would be even bigger than this one. He glanced at the lake one last time before turning toward the SUV, the tension in his shoulders shifting into anticipation, because whatever was inside that envelope, it was going to change everything. Caleb leaned back against the dock post, taking in the quiet, the sunlight, the reflection of the lake, and whispered to himself, and maybe to the viewers, some lessons only hit you when you see someone live them. And trust me, this one's going to stick with you. And that's where we leave it. Part of the story resolved, part of it hanging in the air, like the ripples on the lake. Beautiful, tense, and full of questions. Who really owns the right to judge? Who gets to claim pride? And who has to earn it? And what secrets lie in that envelope Isaiah carried away? I want to hear what you think. Drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done if you were on that dock. Tell me if Randall deserved what happened. Tell me how you feel about Isaiah and the choices he made. Share this with someone who needs to see that sometimes the quietest people are the strongest. And hit that like button if you want to see part 2 when the next secrets unfold. Because trust me, folks, you won't want to miss what comes next.